Looking back over the past 18 years of my ministry with you, it has to be the darkest day we have ever shared. And paradoxically, it wasn't a dark day at all. It was a bright, late summer, early autumn day. I think you realize we're talking about September the 11th. I was at a Bible study with other priests that morning. Somebody stuck their head in the door and said, "Did you hear? A small plane has crashed into one of the towers at the World Trade Center." It sounded like some amateur flyer had just gotten off course and crashed. And then later we heard the real news. And we all scattered to our different parishes. And I can remember coming back here and beginning the grisly work. I was afraid it was going to be grisly. Of finding out where everybody was. Accounting for every person in this parish. The parish administrator at that time finally came in and said, "You can't do this by yourself." And we enlisted the aid of some of the vestry. And slowly but surely we accounted for everyone, except for one family who had gone to Boston to get on a plane and fly to New Zealand. Within a few days, we discovered that family was safe. As a parish, as a spiritual family, we came through that tragedy relatively unscathed physically. But we still felt the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual terror of that day. And many people are still coming to terms, coming to grips with the power of that day. Because on that day, for quite a few people, God died. Just as surely as the people at the World Trade Center, at the Pentagon, and in the field out in western Pennsylvania, God died. And that brings us to the gospel lesson today. And in this gospel lesson, I personally believe the most important part is that very first appearance of Jesus. But we miss that part, because where do we go? What's this day about? Who? Thomas. Doubting Thomas. Thomas. It's always about Thomas. So I'll start with Thomas. But I'll get back to that first part, because it is very important. What John is presenting to us is a reality that he faced in his day. People that knew Jesus by the time this gospel was written, probably already dead or extremely old. There are no more eyewitnesses' accounts. If you want empirical data to believe, it's not going to be there. And then something starts to happen in the church that's been perpetrated by professional holy people over time. The word belief and the word faith become conflated and interchangeable. Oh, belief means faith. Faith means belief. No. In my experience, that is not true. Belief is usually in a set of ideas or hearsay. That's all we have now. We don't have that direct encounter except through faith. Now, in the world of belief, that develops into things like dogma and doctrine. And I know it sounds like I'm really down on dogma and doctrine, but dogma and doctrine present a form and a guide. You and I provide the content to that form and guide. So moving from belief to faith, faith is based on relationship, on knowing in an intuitive way with your heart and with your soul. Belief is an intellectual assent. So on September the 11th, those who had that intellectual assent had it all worked out in the scheme of certainty. God dies. Those who had developed their spirituality to a place of faith The relationship was certainly strained. How could God let this happen? In belief, God shouldn't have let this happen, therefore God does not exist. In faith, it's a cry. How could you let this happen? Now, to the important part of this gospel. Jesus comes to the disciples in John's story. Peace be with you. Has to show them the hands and the scars. And then they go, oh yeah, it is you. Peace be with you. And everybody's happy. And then he breathes on them and he says, receive the Holy Spirit. Wait a minute. That's Pentecost. But it's on the day of resurrection for John. And the Spirit is given to you and to me symbolically through that 12 gathered there. And Numbers 12 means complete or whole. We're made complete by the receiving of that Spirit. And then comes the tough part. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. Think about that for a moment. If you forgive the sins of any, not me because I've got a collar on. He's not talking just to me. He is talking to me. He's talking to you too. If you forgive the sins of any, they're released from that burden. But if you retain the sins of any, you hold them under that weight and contain them in that context of sin. Now, this is really important when it comes to the difference between belief and faith. If I'm in a place of belief, I have it all written out. I have the letter of the law. You sinned, it's right here in this letter. Tough. You retain those sins. Not that you're a sinner, she ain't anything. But if I'm a person of faith, based on relationship, then I know that the Christ in me also is aware of the Christ in you. And I have empathy. And I know there are circumstances that lead us into sin. And I can recognize contrition and deep felt sorrow for mistakes that are made. And in that moment, I can say, don't be in that place. Don't be in that place. I forgive you. Be free. That's the power that you have. It's the power that I have. It's given to us because God has faith in you and God has faith in me. This gospel is all about trust. September the 11th, it was a dark day. And that darkness hung around. The relationship is strained, but as with any strained relationship, there is always hope. And hope is the thing that brings light in the midst of that darkness. May you grow in your faith.